With me today is Fred Alsberg. He's originally from Chicago, received his MFA in creative writing of poetry from the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville. He teaches at Southwestern Oklahoma State University. His poetry has appeared in a number of magazines and reviews, and he is here with us tonight to talk about Reassembling Dust, which is one of the finalists for the Oklahoma Book Awards tonight. Fred, I usually ask what inspired you to write this book, but I know poetry isn't quite that way. You don't just sit down and say, I'm going to write a book of poetry this year, do you?
No, the focus is on individual poems and creating them one at a time, and then later on, if you're lucky, you might see them all come together and form a general purpose.
So now, do you try to write poetry every day?
I don't tend to write poetry every day because sometimes, because of teaching and the like, I'm too tied down. If I get something going that I really enjoy working on, I'll work on it constantly and kind of give short shift to other things that are important.
Right. I had asked you before we rolled tape if there was a poem that you would like to share with us,
Sure.
And so.
Okay, I'll be glad to. This one's called Oklahoma Windscape. Your currents rush in gusts through the invisible ocean we live in. In every tree, crowds of leaves rise in unison, their seeds setting out on journeys. We, however, hurry home, hear murmurous friction, you sharpening yourself on stone. In the eaves, you're a child trying to breathe life back into a broken whistle. You set a quiver window panes. You cause the stagger of a loose shutter. We huddle in basements, in hallways, pray our card house of long-laid plans won't get swept away.
So I think you're talking about a little bit more than worrying whether the roof shingles will come off.
Right, exactly.
So, and I see that as a very important part of poetry, is that you're able to approach things in a slightly different way, maybe a direction that will make us think a little bit more about these things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I like to, at least, I can't speak for everybody, but I think it's important to get people to look at their everyday lives, but in a slightly new way. I would agree with that. Mm-hmm.
Well, most of the poetry in Reassembling Dust it starts out very concrete and very everyday. As you said, you're not writing about knights riding off searching for glory or anything.
No, I refrain from most illusions.
Well,
certainly.
An admirable ambition. I'm not sure most of us can do that.
That's where I think, though, is where the mystery is. It's right in our everyday lives, and that's what we, I think, try and apprehend a little.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the poems that I particularly liked was Paperweight, which is a short poem,
right.
And it seems to be just about snow and cars.
Right. I'm from Chicago, and that was taken. It's kind of a photograph in a way. It was set, put it that way, in a high-rise. And just looking down during a snowstorm and still seeing cars moving around and people walking around. Right.
Right. And you have several on the east, on Hong Kong, and there's one about a lady in Thailand. Now, are these places that you have visited?
Yes, I've been to Hong Kong. My brother worked there for Citibank, and so I spent some time there. My wife is from Malaysia, and so that's how that one turned out.
You said you don't write poetry every day, but do you look for inspiration, or is it just...
Anytime I can find it, certainly, and I tend to jot things down frequently, but I may not actually every single day. I know some people are disciplined, they sit down every single day and work so many hours, and I tend to miss some days and then put in lots of hours other days.
So do you go back and look through things that you have jotted down and say, oh, this I think I can do something with today?
Absolutely. Some of these things, like when you initially put them in something, they may not work. But really, when you write those things down, it's like raw material, and you can sometimes find that you wrote something several years ago, a line or a metaphor or something, and all of a sudden it works perfectly in some other poem. So it's always, I always like to save them and then hopefully utilize them in a poem that's successful.
So I have a vision of you sitting at a desk going through a notebook that's got things written for years and years through it.
Yes, I've got old notebooks, that's for sure, that I've got sitting in a box, and sometimes I go through them, and other times I just keep the lines in my head. Now, since the advent of the computer, I sometimes have lists of them on the computer too.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Another poem that struck me was Next Door, which seems to be about an old lady feeding cats.
Well, it was, and that was when I was living in Tucson, Arizona, and there was an old lady who was just very interested in her cats, but had no interest apparently in human beings and wouldn't respond to a wave. And it was kind of thinking in terms of loneliness. It was kind of what I was trying to, work with there.
Well, I think that your description of the box springs with just little tatters of material still left on them was, I found that very evocative.
Oh, thank you.
And very lonely.
Yeah, that's what I was trying for.
Right. Well, I think you did it. I think you did just fine on that.
Yeah.
And Emptying the Mirror. Now that's about an old man.
Right. And what I was trying to do there was put together spiritual beliefs with scientific, because people often say religion and science don't get along. I was trying to have them in one poem where they do get along. And so I was thinking about dying in the sense of reverse evolution, but also seeing that coming to nothingness in the sense that much like Buddhism, extols.
Right. So, and then the other poem that struck my fancy was The Earrings. And now this is about you noticing the earrings on a girl in a plane.
Right. Just a young girl that happened to be sitting next to me at the time. And
now, was it when you wrote The Earrings? Did you write that shortly after seeing that, or was this one of those things that you came back to later?
Shortly after seeing it and I jotted a note, and then later on I worked on it. And I know it's a very short poem, but just kind of an imagist poem.
Well, I think sometimes the shorter poems take a great deal more work because you have to be. You've only got so many words. You have to be so very careful about each one.
Right. It's true, and sometimes, of course, they start out longer, and you realize much of it is just getting in the way of what you're trying to say, and has to be, pruned, I guess would be the word.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a wonderful word, and it's a little bit like a sculptor cutting away the parts that aren't part of the sculpture.
Exactly like that.
Well, I want to thank you very much for sharing that with us today.
Okay, well, thank you for having me on the show. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Fred Alsberg has been here talking about his book, or collection of poetry, Reassembling Dust. It is one of the Oklahoma Book Award finalists this year, and you'll be able to find it in your local bookstore and your favorite library.